Do we see the microphones on? Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Big thumbs up. Yeah, thank you, Gavin. So good afternoon, everyone, to both in the room and online. I hope you've enjoyed the day so far and feeling recharged following lunch. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the final session of the day to discuss open collaboration in a volatile world. This session will focus on how we support globally open science and technology landscape, particularly in the uncertain geopolitical times, as well as the resilience of the UK system and equitable partnerships. And from this, we'll also discuss how the new government can protect this international collaboration going forwards. In terms of introductions, I am Michelle Hackett. I'm Head of International Fisheries Science at DEFRA, so the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Big part of my role is collaborating internationally to develop and deliver science and advice to support sustainable fisheries management and protect the marine environment. I'm also part of the current cohort of Foundation Future Leaders. So I will be chairing this plenary session. We will start off with a series of short presentations from our four speakers, followed by a panel session answering your questions both in the room and online. So our four speakers are Professor Christopher Smith, who is the Executive Chair at the Arts and Humanities Research Council, as well as the International Champion at UKRI and Creative Industry Sector Champion. Followed by Professor Marika Taylor, who is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Head of College of Engineering and Physical Sciences at the University of Birmingham. And then my fellow Foundation Future Leaders, we have Alex Hale, who is the Technology Programme Manager at the National Composites Centre, and Dr. Geoffrey Neale, who is a Research Fellow and Lecturer at the Royal Academy of Engineering at Cranfield University. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, Professor Christopher Smith.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute delight and pleasure to be here. This is such a powerful group of figures, and so I'm feeling quite humbled in front of you. But it's really exciting to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about open collaboration in a volatile world. And I guess the sorts of things that I wanted to try and do was to say something about what we do, then why I think it's important, and try to kind of open the spaces for the why and how we demonstrate the value from starting from the what. So obviously, UKRI is a major funder of international research as the UK's largest public funder of research with nearly £9 billion a year. Across this past spending review, the one that's just coming to an end, we've spent, I think, something in the region of £4 billion on international collaborations. It's kind of difficult to spot because international just is pervasive through so much of what we do, through co-investigator schemes, through lead agency collaborations, through multilateral collaborations and so forth. And one of the things that one absolutely sees is a result of that in the UK's collaborative capacity. So we're one of the most highly collaborative nations of researchers. So we have very, very high proportions of international co-authorship in UK research. We have a very high proportion of international researchers in UK research, and we have very, very high proportions of international collaboration research with high field-weighted citations. So all of those indices are very much pushing towards UKRI funding international research and being able to show that international research has a value. But there's also some more practical things that I think it's important to just spell out, which is that we are an important player in developing global visas. So we not only gather evidence about global mobility, but we also administer one of the visa schemes, and we are constantly presenting the kind of evidence that we need to show that global talent visas and government authorised exchange mobility is working and is effective and value for money. So that's one part, another part of what we do. So we're a funder, but we're also a supporter and an enabler of mobility. But much of what I've talked about here is very much looking at the UK. And of course, clues in the title, UK Research and Innovation. I represent a UK funding body which is interested in the return to the UK of our international funding. But the title of this session is about the volatility of the world in which we're working. So the rest of the time, I want to talk a little bit about how important it is for us to turn the lens around and look at the importance of our support for the world in research terms. So you can see here one aspect of our collaborative reach, the kinds of indicators. So you've got major international infrastructures around which cohere international teams. Many of them naturally are in Europe and European world. And I'm delighted, for instance, that Mark Thompson, the executive chair of SGFC, is now the director general, or will be the director general of CERN, which is another indication of our capacity to collaborate in partnerships that are spread across the world. And we have other key and critical resources, including some of the ones that are mobile. So there is a quite famous boat down there, which is the HMS David Attenborough. But as you can see from this map, we're also picking up some of the other kinds of facilities that we've got across the world, which enable us to convene international research. Each of those, if they're working well, as I think they are enabling and empowering local communities of one kind or another. I don't think I need to point out that there is a massive concentration in Europe and there isn't very much happening there. And I think that this is something that we need to think about in terms of the volatility and future scoping of the world. So this is not to say that we're not concerned about how we genuinely and properly, equitably partner with colleagues across the world. You can see here that the International Science Partnership Fund, which has got kicked off in this SR, and which some of you may indeed be aware of or be beneficiaries of, is beginning to fill in some of the gaps that are left in the map after the cessation of Global Challenge research funds and Newton. And this is the beginning, I hope, of the way that we start to make a new story for the way that we actively fund across the world. And so here we have some of the funds that kicked off in just a pretty short period of time, because ISPF has really had quite a short run. So this is beginning to get us moving into core parts of Africa. There's a similar map that you could pull out for South America and an interesting and complicated map for India. India now, I think, is a fascinating object of study in itself. India does not at the moment collaborate with us on terms of ODA, but looks to collaborate on its own terms. And that means that we're developing new kinds of partnerships with India. And behind all of this is the other challenge of how we actually collaborate multilaterally. So multilaterally, for instance, with European countries and with Africa or with India. So that's part of our work. The last thing I want to say is that it is never going to be enough for us simply to, it's never going to be enough for us to stand in our own country and reach out a hand, as it were, from our terms to others. We have properly to and equitably co-create research with other countries. That means really understanding their conditions and their terms and working with them. But that will never be truly possible unless we also open science. So unless we're able to make our research data available and make collaboration more possible, open access to research findings, make research data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the FAIR notation, and responsibly assess and recognise skills, both in this country where we actually properly recognise international partnership on a equitable basis, but also support proper recognition right across the world, which we're doing through schemes like COARA, which we're a signatory of, and DORA. We will never actually create the basis on which we can co-create truly equitable research. Why does this matter? So, right back to the beginning. In my view, the UK benefit resides in being not only a great research and innovation country, which we undoubtedly are, but also to be a country which is a force for good. And that good is not just our good, it is a global good. So the way that we think about how we research in a volatile and innovate in a volatile world needs to be sensitive to the causes of that volatility and sensitive to addressing those causes directly, most obviously in terms of climate change, but not solely. So those are the thoughts that I have for what we're trying to do in UKRI, but I'm really interested in your thoughts and also the leadership that I'm sure that you will be offering. So thank you.
So thank you very much. And again, reiterating what Christopher said, it's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to try and complement what Christopher said. I kind of had a sneak preview of his before I wrote my slides, which was very helpful. And I'm going to sort of present this very much from the perspective of a UK university. So in my role as Pro-Vice-Chancellor, member of an executive board of a university, and actually also as a scientific researcher. So I have a research group. In total, it's about 50 people, and we come from 14 different countries. We're a little bit low at the moment. It's usually 16, 17 countries, something like that. So I think for me, one of the things we were asked to reflect on is the importance, making the case for the importance of international collaboration. In my field, actually, a field of maths and physics and AI, it's something we take for granted. And I think it's something that increasingly we need to articulate and really spell out the case for, particularly in the sort of the context of, increasing feeling about immigration, why do we need to bring people to the country? So my first slides are really about the value of internationalization, global cooperation to the research and innovation ecosystem. So, there is a lot of research underpinning this. Companies do not do diversity in any sense, just for philanthropic reasons. They do it because they get better work, right? You have a more diverse team, you have more creativity, you've got more agility, you can respond faster. This is why you get such a powerful research and innovation ecosystem when you're open to the world. And of course, it correlates with the fact that the US and the UK, which have been some of the most open research and innovation systems, are also the strongest research and innovation systems in the world. So that's the broader context. But I think there's something which is sort of worth reminding and links very much with what we saw on the previous slide about some of the big investments from UKRI. Some of the large-scale work that is done these days, what we call big science, it's simply something that one country on its own cannot do. Now, the picture on the right-hand side, which you get prizes if you recognize without the caption underneath, this is sort of, indicating to you that, one of the flagship that people sort of say here, it's the particle physics experiments at CERN. So collaborations of thousands and thousands of people spread in laboratories across the world. So the picture of the detector that's behind me, different bits of that detector will have been built over many years in many different laboratories around the world. The data that's taken from those detectors will again be distributed around the world. We simply couldn't do that kind of science as one country. So it's the European Centre for Nuclear Research. It was founded 70 years ago as a European collaboration. Over the years, it's expanded. It's really a global collaboration. It's never changed its name. CGRN is not so good, right? But actually, these days, to actually keep it going, you need collaboration from all over the world. also already said is that internationalization is consistently correlated with the quality of research, with the impact of research, with the reputation of research, and also correlated into the innovation landscape. So if you're the UK government and its drive for economic growth, you also want to know how your research is going to drive into innovation. All of these things are fed into by having internationalization. Now, from the university perspective, it's clear that the whole of the UK science and technology innovation system, ecosystem, really relies on the UK universities and their international reputation. So we attract students from all over the world, both at undergraduate level, at master's level, at PhD student level. So I was looking up the data for my university and my college. So it's something like 30 to 40% of our doctoral students are international students. We are relying on them across the science and technology domains. And if you look at our UK STEM workforce, a significant fraction of that workforce is coming from international students who studied with us and then stayed in the UK to work afterwards. The picture on the right-hand side, it's taken actually from 2020 data, but I think it is very, very striking when you look at which countries in the world are producing the STEM graduates. So these are bachelor's student graduates, and then they're feeding into the workforce, they're feeding into more advanced study in STEM. And you can see, of course, as you would expect, that India and China are absolutely swamping the rest of the world, right? The amount of students who are coming out there is enormous. I'm going to come back to what we would expect in 20, 30 years. Where is the biggest young population in the world? Well, it's Africa, of course. And if we want the STEM workforce of the future, we need to go to Africa. You see, by the way, that the UK doesn't even make it onto this list. So we really heavily rely on students coming to us, studying with us, and feeding into our workforce. And even the students who don't stay in the UK, they go back and work in other parts of the world. But that feeds into all these international collaborations, those joint research papers, the joint research, the joint innovation projects. It's from the fact that we're connected all over the world. So we need to protect this, I think I would advocate. But we also need to think about, is this the only thing we should be doing? So there are clear challenges with the model of bringing people to the UK. We benefit from it, as Christopher said earlier, from a UK perspective, we benefit. We keep some of them. They go back to the other countries. We collaborate with them. But there are things that we are losing from this approach. So in particular, there are some students who are from parts of the world where they would feel they're not comfortable coming to study in the UK. This may be for EDI reasons. So in particular, if you look at female students in some parts of the world, their families would like them to stay, closer, and they may not have the same opportunities to kind of travel abroad. There's environmental sustainability considerations. We've got hundreds of thousands of students flying back and forth from the UK and China. So, within the next month or so, well, 2 months or so, there will be a mass number of students from the UK going back to China for Lunar New Year, and so on and so forth. This is a considerable concern in the context of sustainability. Also from the perspective of global development, and this I think particularly is a concern for the global south, of students who come to study in countries such as the UK and who never go back. And so you've taken some of the brightest talent, and that is actually impacting on the development of those countries. And so increasingly, I think UK universities need to look at the model of what they're doing, and they need to look at other ways of collaboration. So I'm going to give a couple of examples here and of, where I think there are really positive things coming out of them. So the pictures on the right-hand side, the top right picture is the picture of the Dubai campus that the University of Birmingham has. So that is a campus for about 3,000 students. It attracts in particular actually female students who would be comfortable studying in a country which is a Muslim majority country. So there is an EDI, even though you might not think it, there's actually an EDI element to it. And through that campus, we have research and innovation collaborations. So in particular, we're working with UAE government, business, industry on topics ranging from AI through to issues related to climate change, sustainability, transportation. You may remember early in the year, there were absolutely massive floods in Dubai. The airport was closed for several days. They are not equipped to cope with, dramatic climate events like that. They don't have in the country the level of research and innovation expertise that we have. So we do quite a lot of work with them. And again, it's building relationships, but it's being done in a different way. Bottom right picture comes from our joint institute with Guangzhou, Jinan University in Guangzhou. Guangzhou, some people may know by its earlier name of Canton, so it's a city that's quite close to Hong Kong. So we have about 1,000 students on campus there, and they are studying maths and data science. And again, it's demographically a different group of students from students who would actually come and study in the UK. Now, turning to a broader type of collaborations, and this interfaces very much with the list of investments that was presented on Christopher's slides. So we do work with different parts of the world in different ways. So in particular, if I turn to how we're working with Africa, we have a very long-established partnership with the University of Rwanda, and we have a campus there. So this campus has benefited from investment from DESNES, so it's tens of millions of pounds of investment, also investment from the Rwandan government. But it is actually managed and operated by the University of Rwanda with support from University of Birmingham, also from Cranfield, also from Heriot-Watt. So it's actually very much about, it is a partnership, it is about developing capacity there. This particular campus is very much focused on cold storage technology, particularly for vaccine distribution, particularly in the context of agriculture. So that's one example, and the importance there is very much the partnership with the local university really taking the leadership and building up its capacity. Another example, which again links with the sort of the list of investments of UKRI, is there's a Pan-African network of institutes of mathematical sciences, and this provides graduate education, research training to students across Africa. The training is provided there. People stay there. They pick up very advanced skills. They link very closely to some of the big companies such as DeepMind, such as Microsoft, and they start working for the local branches of those kinds of companies. So this is done in partnership with universities from around the world. So there's often a flying faculty model where people will go in and teach intensely for a few weeks, particular expertise that the local institute doesn't have. But it's actually very much about really building up expertise and capacity in particular regions. So the final thing I wanted to comment on is the balance and the very challenging balance in the science and technology domains between an open collaboration and trusted research. So on the one hand, we are increasingly asked to make everything openly available. Open access publications, data sets being made publicly available for all the reasons which were pointed out earlier, related to reproducibility and so on. On the other hand, there are questions about things where we might be worried about sensitive research, about IP, about things which have dual usage. Now, this for me, I think is always going to be a careful balance, and it's something which evolves quite rapidly with time. The landscape is evolving, I think, quite regularly over the last couple of years. We have seen sort of bodies such as NPSA and CRAT having to update their advice very regularly. For me, what we need to do is make sure that we don't take this as a complete shutdown and say, well, there are entire things we can't do or entire parts of the world we can't work with. The lesson from history is that that's not the right thing to do. We need to keep those windows of communication, those relationships open. We need to do it in a nuanced and careful way, taking advice as appropriate. And the final slide, to sort of conclude with this, so this again resonates with some picture we saw previously, are there examples of very large-scale collaborations which work in parts of the world and involve parts of the world where there are very complex relationships? And the answer is yes. CERN is not the only example of those. There are many other collaborations of this nature. But I think you can see from what is shown in this map. So CERN, the founding CERN member states are shown in blue. These are, as I said, the European nations. But over the years, CERN has evolved to bring in many parts of the world. You can see in orange, Russia is a part of CERN. That has obviously had to be dealt with in a very sensitive way over the last couple of years. China is also part of CERN. And this has been dealt with. There are ways in which you can collaborate, and then there are areas in which you have to say that is, something where we need to be more careful. So if this is something which is going to go into a particular type of technology, that is something where you would perhaps not be collaborating with those people. So hopefully that gives some sort of things for us to reflect on. Thank you very much.
Oh, right, I'm going to put a timer on because otherwise I'll waffle forever. So thank you very much. Is there a slide? Oh, is it me? I'm in charge. There we go. Stupidly, I forgot to put my own name on my front cover. So you get a nice National Composites Centre front cover. So my name is Hale. I'm a technology program manager at the National Composites Centre. The National Composites Centre is part of the Catapult network, and our primary role is all about industrialization and building that bridge between the academic world, that low TRL research, and industry and government that are providing that pull into a world where we can actually use the research that is generated by all the amazing academics that are in the UK and around the world. So we sort of sit at that centre of that research ecosystem and trying to bridge that gap. So what I thought I'd very briefly do is just touch on some of the challenges that we see both from the academic side and the industrial side, and how we can sort of bridge that gap a bit better. Something that I thought I'd briefly mention is some of the challenges that we see and what is meant by a volatile world, really. And we often find that all the R&D that we do can always be brought back to, if you ask enough why questions as to why you want this or why you're doing that, why you want to develop this product, why you want to work in this particular area of R&D, you can bring it back to one of those core challenges that we're seeing around the world. And that's not just sort of defense-related things around, war, but it's climate change, it's socio-economic instability, it's food security, supply chain security. We often find that if you ask enough why questions as to the people that are doing the research, you can bring it back to identifying and aligning with one of these major challenges that allow us to work within this volatile world and approach some of these challenges to improve things for the better. So a few key challenges that we note: freedom to collaborate. The often find that academics and industry, they operate at completely different levels. So being able to facilitate those discussions and make sure that people are talking the same language, whether that be just understanding what it is that the technology translation is happening, how that could be funded, what the future use cases for that are, and then sort of those emerging higher risk technologies that perhaps aren't ready for to go out into an industrial world yet. And that's where we look to sort of government interventions and things like that for those higher risk elements. And that brings sort of onto funding. There's so much funding. UKRI, one of the UK's biggest funding bodies, and do a fantastic job of that, and really helps that work fantastically well. But those very first stage interactions are part of one of the biggest and most beneficial parts on that innovation journey and bringing science and technology to life. So having those tiny bits of money to make sure that the people with the ideas can talk to the people who can bring those ideas to life. It needs to happen a little bit more, and we need some slightly different mechanisms to make that work and bring those ideas to life. Something that I'm quite passionate about, sort of knowledge access. When we talk to industry, they go, we don't know who to talk to. We don't know who has the ideas, who has those resources and knowledge and IP that can help solve the problems that we see in across the world. And it's not like industry and academia don't want to give those ideas out. They are there, they want to be given out, but it's just understanding where they sit, who can talk to who. We see people come up with ideas around sort of machine learning and AI, about bringing together an understanding and mapping the IP and knowledge resource across academia to be able to link up all those individual ideas. So you go, I've got a fantastic idea to do X, and this person's got a little bit of it, and this person's got a little bit of it, and how we can bring that all together. It is really challenging, and events like this are really useful for making that happen. And then finally, market access. I don't really want to sort of dwell on Brexit, but there's obviously a lot of sort of barriers to further information trade globally, and companies getting access to global resources to be able to be successful. But then looking internally, so DBT and DSIT currently do a lot of work on investigating and looking at global challenges that should then inform what the UK innovation landscape and UK funding landscape should be. But I think that needs to be sort of a bit broader, at least from the view of the Catapult Network. We'd like to see even more global investigation to go, right, what are the global technology pushes and pulls that will enable us to be successful as a country and fund in the right areas. So hopefully that's sort of a bit of a review from the middleman, as it were. And yeah, thank you very much.
Right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So my name is Neale. I'm a Royal Academy of Engineering Research Fellow at Cranfield University, and I'm also a lecturer. I also hold the position, quite a lot of hats on today, actually. I also hold the position, but it's relevant to this, of the chair for ED&I for what was the School of Aerospace Transportation and Manufacturing. We've done an internal reshuffle now. We're now the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Sciences, if I think that's correct, at least. But so today I'm going to talk a bit about how open collaboration has really led to quite a lot of success from Cranfield's perspective, and how from a science and technology background, we've managed to push forward in this area. So for those of you who don't know Cranfield, we're based in Bedfordshire. We're a postgraduate only university focusing on technology and management, so really only engineering and management studies. We don't have any undergraduates, and we don't have any other faculties that deal with things that aren't technology and management. One of the fun things about Cranfield is that we have lots of planes. So we're an old RAF base, and then it turned into the Cranfield College of Aeronautics, which was run by the government, and then eventually Cranfield University. So the picture there is of our Boeing 737, which is not airworthy, it's ground-worthy. So we do sort of avionics tests and that sort of thing in this plane. But we have a fleet of aircraft. The two biggest being, yes, the 737, but also a Saab 340B, which hosts the National Flying Laboratory. And this is a perfect example of how open collaboration and open work with facilities that we have has really helped the UK and people globally. Because what we do is lots of UK universities, every university in the UK, I think, except for Sheffield, and there's one more that does an aerospace engineering degree, gets to fly on our Saab 340B as one of their courses. And we do this not only for UK students, but we do this for students outside of Britain as well. So some statistics up there. So over 30 countries of international alumni across the world. 88% of our research is world leading, and we have mutually beneficial relationships with over 1,500 companies, institutions around the world, with 40% of our student population coming from outside of Britain. So we have a real international push at Cranfield that we're really, really proud of. And how has this worked, and why has this been effective? One, because we feel as though our collaborations encourage really strong impact. We work all around the world with different people with diverse perspectives from different places. This represents significant income generation from our perspective. Actually, we have the highest income generation per academic in the country, and a lot of this is focused on trying to go out there and be of use to people globally. And we use this to address global challenges. In looking at our international students, we use them sort of like Marika said. They help us connect with different and new collaborators around the world. We have students that come to Cranfield, they do their courses, they go back to where they come from, or they might stay in the UK. But a couple of years down the line, they're now the heads and the CEOs and the technology chiefs. And we use this international network beneficially, mutually beneficially, to enhance our collaboration offers. And it has really paid off. Really good personal touch. We're out there with all these different alumni communities and really making an impact in this sort of way through science and technology. We really focus on developing diverse talent pools. We know that there's a large skill gap in science and technology in Britain. And what we need to do and what we're trying to do is make science and technology more attractive to students overseas as well as students in Britain, really focusing on underrepresented groups of people. We need more people in STEM. We need to open new avenues for collaboration. This is important and not possible when people feel excluded. So it's really about having a welcoming, international, diverse environment where students and academics, researchers can thrive. And the last point there is really around long-term impact. And this is not just immediate direct impact from investment, from foreign investment or from local investment, but this is sort of the long-term growth that these sort of international collaborations promises the UK. As we said, we have collaborations that last years and years and years and have really had strong impact cases around the world, focusing on agriculture, energy, food, aerospace, defense, and so on. And we all know that we have these large global challenges which are present, like climate change and evolving AI. We really have a big focus in this area and try to do our best to sort of collaborate and contribute to the global economy on this level. So my point here is really that we're tackling UK problems, we're tackling global problems, and a problem shared is a problem halved. And this is sort of our mantra at Cranfield, and this sort of makes what we do so effective and so successful. So thank you very much.
Sorry, you're all very late to time. I wasn't ready to come up yet. Right, so I'd like to invite all the speakers back onto the stage to start our panel discussion. Thank you, Gavin. So I'll take the liberty of kicking off the discussion, just to allow a bit of time for everyone to sort of formulate their questions, including those online. Please do submit them. In all your presentations, you obviously touched on why international collaboration is important and the benefits it can bring. To ask I say slightly provocative question, more of a challenge about that I assume you probably heard previously, and it's interesting it came up in the breakout session for clean energy superpower about the importance of sovereign capability. Now I appreciate that's a different circumstance, but why can't we just do these things ourselves? Why can't our plucky little country get on with it internally? And I was thinking particularly linking to how we balance supporting UK talent as well as collaborating internationally. That's a very broad question. Up to you guys who wants to take it first.
I can go first. So yeah, on the point of sovereign capability, I think there's very much a balance to be had about what problems are trying to be solved. Defence, is quite a hot topic at the moment, for obvious reasons. But defence spending and defence research is more than just sort of bombs and planes and things like that. It really has wider implications to societal stability, supply chain strength, resilience on a global level. Because now that we are such a connected world, any implications locally also have massive implications globally. So being able to recognize the challenges that you're taking on can never just be a local challenge are really important. So yes, you can, focusing on sovereign capability is important for certain elements, but just being able to recognize the impact that can be had globally and everybody is having the same challenges. There's no such thing as just a UK specific challenge. Everybody else is probably going to be having the same challenge. So being able to recognize that and then lean on the people globally to be able to solve that is really important. Thoughts?
So, I completely agree with that. So going to the sovereign capability, I think recognizing where you've become over-dependent on what might become an unreliable partner. Not that I'm looking across the Atlantic at this point, after what happened on Wednesday. But to some extent, we became complacent, right? We became complacent. We're reliant on global supply chains, which could break down. The critical technologies have been identified because the global West has become over-reliant on supplies from areas of the world which may, in the upcoming years, break off. So I would take it as almost as a call to arms that where we recognize that we've become over-dependent, we don't have sufficient sovereign capability, we need to build that up urgently. We need to, draw people in. We need to communicate the excitement of it. We need to get them into the areas they need to be in. And to some extent, that was why I showed the plot earlier of actually we're still not getting enough coming in, right? We all know around this room, or many of us around this room will know that there are many positions which are really hard to fill. So wherever you're working in the areas of science and technology, it can be really hard to fill. So I think it's really important, but there is this balance. And that was where I said at the end of my sort of presentation, there are these balances, these tensions to have.
Okay. Do you want to go next? Okay. Okay. So I do agree with everything that's been said before. I'm going to be slightly contrarian, just otherwise, because we all will do is agree with each other. And I want to worry about sovereign and what we're actually meaning when we're talking about sovereignty in this particular context. And I think the reason why I'm allergic slightly to the adjective is that I think it's sometimes used in a way that overstates the independence that is possible of a national capability. Sovereignty, as we all know, is a word that got bandied around quite a lot a few years ago. I actually edited a book on the subject, denying that it was nearly as important a subject as people thought it was. And the reason why I fret about it is not because I disagree that we need in certain areas, particularly of defence, or in certain areas of capability, the capacity to operate as a country, and that we need to be able to be to guard against overdependence. It's that the question that I think the sovereign bit of it overstates is what the capability is that we should actually be developing. The capability fundamentally seems to me to be about talent. The infrastructure that's necessary in order to be able to develop that talent then becomes critical, of course, and one part of it is universities, another part of it is kit, institutes, etc. But unless we have the ability as a country to develop talent, then we won't ever be able to use the kit that we might have. So this then becomes our national capability, not so much the building, and I'm not for a moment, by the way, suggesting you were saying this, I'm just riffing on the idea, but it's not the building or the kit or whatever it is, our capacity to use that. And then the question then becomes, instead of worrying about it being a sovereign capability, thinking about what that capability is able to do for the UK in the world. What is it that we can take of the thing which we own that we can share with others without challenge, or indeed must share with others? This then, I think, becomes a really powerful call to arms to pick up your point about the call to arms for how we share, what we share. Now, open as possible, closed as necessary kind of approach remains absolutely critical for those of us who do, in some parts of our lives, work in a defence-related area. But to come back to the open as possible, we need to think about where, in the terms of the integrated review, force for good comes in. And this, I think, becomes, my last thing I'm going to say, very interesting about what we tend to think of as our sovereign capabilities, because often our sovereign capabilities are those things where we specifically worry about our capacity to engage in particular kinds of science. The sovereign capability that I'm worried about right now is our capacity to deliver any kind of modern languages teaching anywhere in the UK, which will erode our capacity to engage globally in an intelligent way. So one of our sovereign capabilities needs not only to be able to build a workforce capable of using the buildings and the kit, etc., that we necessarily have, but also to do it in a global way and to have the ethical framework, which means we do so equitably. And I think if we got that rounded notion of sovereign capability, which I'm sure you were implying as well, but I think that becomes essential for us to say every time we talk about the sovereign capability, it's the skills to be able to operate in a global context equitably and with our peers. And there, I think it's vital that we don't lose that, because that is the basis on which our collaboration works. Sorry about that.
I think you've made a good point there, and I'm going to follow the contrary path as well. Yeah, I think we live in a world with a lot of global problems, and I think one of the dangers of sort of saying we can do it alone and sort of focusing on our own development is that we sort of create solutions that aren't really transferable to other places. And I think, for example, I remember a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with, I probably shouldn't say the name, with a European car manufacturer. And we were talking about, this big push within Europe. At the time, the deadline for the total transferal to electric vehicles, I think, was 2030. It might have been pushed back now. And one of the guys in the room said, "Oh yeah, we're going to do all electric vehicles by 2030. We're going to sell these things all everywhere around the world." Blah, 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 blah. And one of the guys in the room was from Rwanda. And he raised his hand. He said, "Okay, and where in Africa are you putting these? Where in sub-Saharan empty, Africa, the bits that are super empty and sparse, are you putting these charging stations?" And everybody sort of looked around the room and they sort of said, "Okay, these places, some of these places don't have electricity. So you're creating a solution that's great for the environment and all the rest of it, but it's actually not going to have the impact that you think, because yes, in Europe and in America and in the developed parts of the world where there is rampant electricity supply and it's all good, this will work. But you have large swaths of the planet where this is not feasible, and it's not to say that we shouldn't try and push these solutions forward. It's just about thinking about the way that the impact of the solutions that we're proposing, are they actually going to be as impactful as we think? And I think that if we have this closed view towards technology development, this closed view towards, let's develop our own sovereign capability that works for us, then it might work for some others, but it's not going to be as well designed and as well developed to be as agile and as transferable as it can be.
Okay. So opening out to the floor. Oh, thank you. So let's give some time people think of juicy questions. We'll go here. Whoever's close to you.
Hello, thank you for your presentations. I think I have, I suppose, kind of an elephant in the room question, and that is the subject of intellectual property. And obviously there are differing legal frameworks and cultures and perspectives on what intellectual property is when you're collaborating internationally. How is that reconciled when keeping collaboration as open as possible, but also being as closed as possible, and who owns what ultimately in terms of the knowledge that's being generated or the innovation that's being generated, if that makes sense?
I can kind of start off, and yeah, I'll start by saying that academics don't like dealing with intellectual property. It's a lot of work, and we're not lawyers, so we do struggle. But you know, inadvertently we do develop ideas sometimes, and we do have to think about the intellectual property of these things, you know, domestically and internationally. One of the things that I think is quite important is that, the British government has the Subsidy Control Act, for example, which focuses on making sure that whenever public money is spent on research, you know, the intellectual property then stays with the academic instigator, and it doesn't sort of spread down to a commercial body that then capitalizes on this development without. And whenever you have, funding bodies, for example, I get a lot of my money from the Royal Academy of Engineering. This is something that's baked into the agreements to make sure that the people who develop the technology and the people who develop the IP actually hold on to it in a sensible way and can then capitalize on how things move forward. In terms of international collaborations, yes, you know, it's important that we pay attention to this and sort of, you know, in the early stages set out how you propose to share this knowledge. But I mean, I think depending on who your partners are, and this is going back to this aspect of trusted research, you know, open but trusted, you know, provided that, you know, you trust your partner and due diligence is done, then, you know, this on paper shouldn't be a problem. But I'm sure there's more comments from the rest of the room. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the first point is it's complicated. I mean, and actually I have to sign off most of these agreements, right? So they come to me for approval. It's going to be complicated. The thing one wants to do is to try and simplify as much as possible by having sort of framework agreements, by having some sort of common practices, right? So, you know, where there can be kind of mutual agreements between governments and so on, that can be something that's helpful. Where there can be sort of within particular domains, say the automotive sort of industry or something like this, you know, you've got complicated supply chains and so on, again, across the world, different, you know, development happening in different countries, where there can again be sort of, again, some framework agreement for this, that can be something that simplifies it. But ultimately, it's something, I guess, that makes Christopher happy because it actually crosses into the legal domains and actually creates a lot of interesting challenges to address of it. And it's absolutely important, I think, that, you know, we do need to consider it. I don't know whether...
The only thing that I'm really interested in what this room will be talking about, what we'll be saying about intellectual property in 30 years' time. We have taken a view of intellectual property, which is essentially something which we drew up somewhere between the Reformation and the Enlightenment in a European context. We have stuck with it till now. It is not universal. And I think we're about to hit a world where it becomes extremely difficult to operate in those terms. If you're a creator right now and watching the government, even this government's regulations or legitimization of the possibility to scrape intellectual property freely and use, then you will have a very protective view of your intellectual property, but it's running up against different kinds of realities. So I think hold your question in 30 years' time. Let's see whether we're still talking about intellectual property or whether we're actually talking about something entirely different or talking about it in a different way. That's going to be a very interesting battle.
Just as a very quick final point, the slight extra advocation for the Catapult Network and the Catapult adjacent organisations that we are part of our remit is semi-government endorsed and semi-government funded sort of the middleman element, but we don't retain the IP. So people can come to us and use our capabilities, use our knowledge, use our facilities, and not have to worry about IP challenges and things like that. And so that's part of our role, basically. Now, obviously, that's quite a UK-centric thing and doesn't really solve any of the international elements, but encouraging wider use of facilities and resources that are equivalent to that should hopefully enable that sort of future development. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just counter that a little bit? So I do completely agree with what you say, but so we work closely with the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which is another catapult, and of course, where you've brought in university into the game as part of the you bring the IP back in the room, and so the amount of things from the MTC that come through my desk is quite considerable, actually. Nevertheless, that's not to say that I don't agree with what you first said, but it's actually, it depends at what stage you're bringing things through, right? So if it's coming through from low TRL, from university-based research, there will still be the IP element. But I think what you're saying absolutely resonates with my point about simplifying the framework, right? And where we can, actually making it easier for people to work with.
Yeah. Yes, I'll take one in the room and then I'll go to online. So I'll go here.
Thank you. Mine's on a similar theme. Thinking about the issue I keep coming across is that of export control. Do you think that the current regulatory framework is fit for purpose? And if yes, fantastic. If not, what would need to change to help foster innovation and collaboration?
Things to say about yes, I have strong opinions about export control. I mean, everything I do is classed as defense in some way, shape, or form, and it has become a bit of a pain for me. And I think what's interesting, and perhaps somebody in this room has more experience on export control than I do, but the view that sort of trickled down to academics that I'm in my circle is sort of that the responsibility for making sure that information that falls within the category of export control to make sure this information doesn't leave the country without the government's approval is sort of down to you, which I don't think is the right approach. And I've been to so many seminars which sort of on export control sort of scare you and say, listen, if you don't make sure that that this the what you're working on doesn't leave the country in some way, shape, or form, we'll find you and prosecute you, and that'll be the end of this. And it's a bit scary. But we've also had some really interesting stories of academics going to seminars in countries, and the sort of policy being, oh well, you can't take your laptop. And then you get a burner laptop which has nothing on it, which is essentially a brick at this point. You might as well not have it. So I think, so my point is here that I see the value of export control, and I see why it's useful. And I've been through so many export control applications for quite a lot of different things, and it's quite complicated. It's quite well defined when you really get into it. But I think the thing is, I think that the government needs to be, the powers that be need to be a bit more, in my view, needs to be a bit more specific about how we define things, and perhaps a bit more education and training on how you apply export control sensibly is really useful, because I don't think it's trickling down to academics particularly well. I don't know, maybe you have different opinions.
So again, I'm going to say, first of all, I don't disagree with anything you said. The second thing I'm going to say is I'm extensively involved in export control, both from the perspective of the university side as somebody who works myself in defence, and actually from the third side of actually often adjudicating on quite complicated cases, helping the appropriate organisations to do so. It needs to evolve. There's no question. So the answer to that is it does need to evolve. One of the challenges I see is that the landscape of research and innovation in these areas is so complex, and you're asking people to make judgments which are incredibly subtle. So if you put quantum in the title, that worries people, even though most quantum science is absolutely public domain and it's all there, and there's, and you can basically take it around the world, and then there's nothing they're going to learn from that paper. Sorry, there's nothing they're going to learn for you that's not already in Nature and Science. The thing that you should really be worried about is specific quantum engineering. It's probably the engineering stuff, right? But that subtlety is quite difficult for people who perhaps don't have the technical expertise on it. So I think as we evolve, so that's why you can't give those clear cut. Yeah. You can't do this. That's why it's so tough. The teams who are having to evaluate this are still very small teams. Actually, they've got a lot coming through to them. I think, given that context, they are doing a fantastic job. They are reaching out to universities. We are shaping as they go. So we actually have at Birmingham very close interactions with them, and have done for the last couple of years, to really keep shaping and saying, that domain is probably, that's one where the risks are not high. This is an emerging domain where the risks are higher. This is what to look for. But I think it needs to evolve. And I do agree that on the ground for academics, that this is incredibly difficult. The feeling that it's individuals responsible is problematic, but ultimately this is geopolitical espionage and so on. So there is some sense of that, right? That there is, but we need, in some sense, more support for the academics to do so. And I think that's possible in some institutions and some contexts more than others. I think this is why I said on my slide that it's something that's evolving very rapidly, but it's still got a way to go. And I don't know a country that does it better, actually. One of the things I find positive at the moment is that there is some flexibility in the system, actually. So although it's frustrating that there are all these grey areas, on the other hand, it's positive there's grey areas. It's also positive that RCAT is at the moment, it's very much an advisory body, because again, it allows you to go back and forth and have those dialogues. There are parts of the world, the US is a place that has had some very strict rules in place and some very hard barriers, and it puts behind barriers things which really should be open in public domain, because it's kind of the better safe than sorry approach. So in that sense, I think we've got something very valuable, but I do agree we need to shape it, and very much welcome people getting involved. So if you're reached on to help shape it, please do so.
More of an inter-panel question for you two. Do you think that things get overclassified through academic fear of getting it wrong? And what have we lost international collaboration-wise from potential overclassification of things that don't need to be classified?
Yeah. So I've got a combination of both extremes. So there are things where I just shake my head and said, why on earth did you ever think you could possibly do that with that collaborator? This is just so crazy. So it's gone whoosh over their head. So there's still some of that going on, but there's also people saying, well, I absolutely can't work with China in any way at all. That's totally not possible. And of course, that's too extreme in the other direction. So my mathematicians, and I see somebody from mathematics, and they are thinking, I can't work. And of course, the vast majority of things they do in mathematics, they can work with China, but it's so they have I think it's where we need to keep discussing, we need to keep training, we need to keep the dialogue open. At the same time, there are areas where it can be really hard for people because it is dual use, but they've never known what the dual use is, right? So there was something which came to my attention recently and I just had to stop it immediately, because I happen to know from my own context that this is really something we couldn't do. And it came as a surprise to the people because they hadn't actually sort of ever thought that was something which could be risky. So you've absolutely got a point, but we've still got people for which the whole export control agenda is just whoosh over the head, and they're doing things which they probably shouldn't be doing. So,
yeah, I'd like to agree with that. I think in Cranfield particularly, we're in an interesting position because we are I forget what they call it, type whatever defense supply. So everybody has to be very compliant with the government sort of defense regulations for what we can supply and what we can't. And export control has been drilled into all of us quite heavily. But I will I do definitely agree with what you're saying. I think there's some things that are sort of overclassified, and what I will say on that is that I think it's regrettable that I've been in environments, not at the university, but sort of in the wider field, where so you just mentioned people saying I can't work with China, for example. I have been in environments where people have sort of discriminated based on nationality because of export control, and I think it is really regrettable that that's sort of the direction that some people are taking. And I think the point I want to make is that I think we need to be careful about, export control is not about somebody's nationality. It's about information leaving, the country. Is very different. And I think that we just need to make sure that from a diversity and inclusion perspective, we're very clear on the difference between what the law is trying to achieve, and sort of not let this seep into our psyche in different ways. Just based on experience dealing with different people for different things. It's a point to raise, I think. Yeah.
So not quite related to what you said at the end. So in terms of not quite understanding these things, so there was a discussion on LinkedIn recently about potentially the government insisting that in sensitive domains, before you sent the publication to the journal, you know, to an international journal, you would seek export control. And this just displayed such a lack of understanding of academic publishing at so many levels, you know. So whether it's a UK-based journal or international journal, it will have international reviewers, et cetera, et cetera. The idea that as you send something to a journal, that would, you know, we'd essentially almost halt publication in the UK if we took this to, you know, because people would be, we'd block the entire system, I think, if we were really sort of screening every single print. And then the basic question of how could you actually screen every kind of preprint without reaching out to people, you know, without seeking expertise from outside the UK. So there are gaps. And I think it goes back to this point about, you know, really needing to keep the dialogue going about what is a feasible method which achieves what we want it to achieve, but isn't over-regulatory, doesn't put too many burdens. It's actually something you can operationalize. Now, fortunately, and maybe Chris can comment on it, this threat disappeared. You can comment.
Yeah, I think, I think that particular one slowed down, but it is interesting that there is just a lingering concern, I think, that there are parts of our world that are looking at open science and thinking, I'm not sure that all the consequences have been thought through, which then intersects with the other bit of our world, which is saying that we need to, you know, make things available. I guess I've got a couple of things to say. So, under classification, I do vividly remember saying to somebody who was very, very pleased that they were about to take a really cunning piece of creative industries, facial recognition technology into Hong Kong, that might not be the cleverest thing they might ever do. Secondly, I think we're talking very much at the moment in a university adjacent world. There's an awful lot of stuff that's happening that's not in that world, and that is a matter of significant, I think, concern that we have to have in all sorts of ways, including the increasing role of corporations that are at least as big as some countries, bigger than many. And I guess the last thing to say is that this fundamentally has to be a risk-based assessment, which is why it can never be perfect. If we don't allow it to be a risk-based assessment, then we will never have the opportunity cost, something that you mentioned, of closing too hard. And I guess the maturity of the conversation will allow us to acknowledge that sometimes we will get things wrong. There will be things where we have either been too open or too closed. We learn from that and move on. The worst situation, I think this is what fortunately this country is not in, so I agree with you, we have many benefits, that we are able to have a mature conversation which admits not everything is perfect. I hope we stay there, because otherwise I think we'll get into a frightful muddle.
Well, I'll turn to our online correspondents, James, if there's any questions from the online audience.
Yeah, so we've got a few questions online. Martin Lilly, for example, asks, has technology removed the need to travel to collaborate internationally? What can't we do with technology in the various disciplines of industry, research, and policy? Why do we still need to travel?
I don't think technology removes the need to do this. And the face-to-faceness and all the rest of it. I think we have to be incredibly responsible of the carbon footprint of science. I don't think that technology can help with that, but I don't think it will ever replace our the value of the conversations that we can have with each other, and particularly those that are, as it were, are able to happen with a degree of privacy, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with this. So, you know, long before the pandemic, I was somebody who had collaborators all over the world, and a lot of the collaboration would be done by Skype or Zoom. I was fortunately a Zoom user long before the pandemic, so pandemic wasn't so hard. I was also used to giving talks virtually at conferences, so I wouldn't go. I was using very much a value-based approach to travel, so I wasn't traveling unnecessarily, thinking very carefully where the researchers in their group would go. But there's still some sense of the actual face-to-face, the in-person interaction being so much more powerful. And for anyone who challenges that, would you have all your interactions with your family over Zoom? Would you do that? So I think it's that responsible usage of, let's not go back to this, just sending people automatically, in person. Let's actually contemplate where that is actually something that could be done really well online, and how we can have a balance of those things.
Really amused at the number of people who looked quite chuffed at the idea of only having to meet their family.
Yeah, I'll just quickly mention the point that I think we can't underestimate the value of sort of meeting people in person, especially for early career researchers and early career professionals. I think when you're young, you're fresh out of university and your first job or so on, you don't have the collaborators, the contacts, the networking that somebody who's been in the game for a bit longer might already have. And the only way to get that is to go and interact with people. So, I think I agree that, we can reduce our carbon footprint and we can sort of reduce the amount of travel necessary. But I think for people who are in the early stages of their career, it is paramount that they go out there and sort of make the connections that they need to advance their career forward. Yeah.
I think the last thing to add just be around the benefits of the new way of working from an international point of view, and reaching areas of the world that perhaps haven't had the attention of sort of particularly the high output scientific output areas of the world. So we talked a lot about Africa earlier. So obviously the internet in Africa is now much better than it was, but still it's not as good as some Western nations, parts of Asia and things like that. So that as a barrier to communication and collaboration is a fantastic opportunity to be able to, and time zones as well. It's a difficult thing to deal with.
Keep you on our toes. I'll go back in the room. Oh, over the corner. Finally made it over.
Thank you. I'll take a deliberately non-nuanced standpoint here, just to see what you say. So going back to that conversation around sovereign capability, we've spoken a lot here about research skills, but a fundamental problem that we have, and the FST has held an event on this before, is innovation in this country. And we simply do not attract enough money to grow technologically led companies. We're very good at fundamental research. We're very good at spinning out. We are no good at growing. As soon as a company needs that kind of funding, they go across the Atlantic, they look abroad. So if we're talking about building careers and providing skills to people, where are these people going to actually get jobs? And how are we going to fund the solutions to these national and global challenges if we don't have those companies coming into existence in this country? So I suppose my point will be, it's a volatile world. You've got to withstand all that battering from outside. How can you do that if you don't have strong economic growth?
Yeah, right. Happy to go first.
Go on, you have to.
Okay. So lots of discussion, of course, from the incoming government on this. And I'm lucky enough to sort of have a number of meetings with Peter Kyle recently. Particularly, he was not far from here a couple of weeks ago for the Birmingham Tech Week, and absolutely emphasising what he feels the government actually needs to do to get investment in the country. He's been spending a lot of time actually in Silicon Valley talking to people about what are the barriers to investment. So some of it's the regulatory environment. Some of it is labour law. So there's actually a tough challenge there, right? Because that's in contradiction perhaps with what Labour government might want to do. I've actually had, so when I was a PhD student, I was also involved with innovation, and innovation actually very much at the centre of what I'm doing in the university here. I've had a spin-out company which was scaled up, was bought by something from Palo Alto. And for me, the biggest differences in the US system is very much a can-do attitude. It's less risk-averse from the investors. So I think there's that. We need to sort of reflect on how to deal with that. There are things that the government can do. The technical, the point about pensions and pension funds being less risk averse is a crucial one. But I think ultimately for me, it's about an attitude change, because if we're recognizing as a country that we want to drive economic growth, we need to get behind this, and we need to, reflect on how we're actually going to do so. It's not just the technical regulatory thing; it's actually the belief in it.
Thank you. And sorry, I should have added a little bit to my question, which was linked to this topic. Are there any ways that you can see that open collaboration actually can contribute to this? Because it's one thing of having talent come in, training them up, and then seeing them out the revolving door. Sorry, that was the point. I'm making it a bit more relevant.
So where would we start? So there clearly are things like the pensions fund, the National Wealth Fund, which are the sorts of changes which governments are looking at now. The previous government started to think, this government continuing to think, which are releasing access to finance, which is one of the things that certainly in creative industries, which is the industry sector that I know best, but I think other sectors as well, is showing is the big problem. There's a secondary issue, which is access to finance to scale up, which I think is one of the points you're making, that we're very good at kicking things off. We're not necessarily as good at scaling up. That's an interesting challenge, because it does require us to pick winners, which is something that we have tended not to wish to do in quite the way that other countries do. So there is, absolutely agree, a lot of this is behavioural and attitudinal. I think the last thing I would say, and let others have a go at this, is that so there are historical reasons, I think, to try to unpack as to why it is that we feel that our productivity is not working, our capacity to be a productive nation, in contrast with some other European countries, etc. And I wonder whether one of the issues that we're going to have to address is getting a better narrative about what growth means and what its purpose is. Many of those narratives tend to be framed in ways that are neither European ones around social good, nor very, very strongly American ones about personal self-enrichment, but fall somewhere in the middle in a kind of muddle. And I think we maybe need to think about our emotional economy of growth. And what is it we're actually wanting to invest in growth for? And I think that if we had a clearer statement of what the purpose of increasing the wealth of the nation is, that there might be a thread that would then take us through. Well, when Adam Smith was writing about the wealth of nations, he had a very clear narrative about where the wealth was going to go and what it was for, which meant that that kind of approach to capitalism had a very clear golden thread. Some part of it was imperialism. I'm not praising it, therefore, for that. But it had a narrative which was consistent. I don't think we've got that narrative. So when we talk about this, we end up with the mechanisms without necessarily the motivation. So I'm basically repeating that point, that it's highly behavioural, and then that kind of makes us think about where we should intervene over and above the mechanism itself.
I have nothing to say.
I also don't have too much to say, just particularly on one point on your point about risk, and the UK is relatively risk averse, and when it comes to business financing and the way businesses operate. So there's a whole level of legislation and legislative background to the way that organizations run themselves and operate and take technological risks with the way they develop. So, America very much encourages the sort of fail fast attitude. If you fail at a business, you go bankrupt. Fine, just start another one with a slightly different idea, and that's completely encouraged. And we don't have that same culture and legal framework to enable that to happen in the UK. So I'm not saying that's the sole reason behind your question, but just a small element of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it links to the point was made about picking winners. So here we often let things drift by small investments that keep them ticking over instead of being quite a lot more brutal and just saying, well, let them fail. And then absolutely your point about, really trying, deciding on a strategy. I think that was what I was getting at and it links with the conversation that we were actually having before this discussion of, when times are hard with budgets, you need to really make difficult decisions instead of just slicing a little bit off here and there. If we really want to go for economic growth, we might have to recognize that, what we're going to have to do has some uncomfortable trade-offs. And we need to actually consciously decide those trade-offs. And I think we don't tend to do so. We've got, it's a positive thing that we have, in a sense, quite a stable environment, but we make incremental changes. We don't really make big changes. And I think that's what we're going to need to do. I am curious in the sense that the rhetoric or the discussion that I've heard over the last couple of months has been much stronger of, we need a step change. Now, the question is what actually comes forward from that, which remains to be seen. It's meant to address many of your regulatory points, but it remains to be seen whether it does so.
Okay, I'll just go back to our online audience quickly. Did you say there was another question at least, James? Okay. Just to keep there. Don't want to neglect them.
Yes, so there's one from Emily Starkov who is interested to hear panel members' views about how demonstrating the benefits that open international collaboration can bring in science and academia could translate into positively impacting wider societal attitudes towards immigration. Or to put it in the opposite way, how do societal attitudes towards immigration affect the ability for the UK to benefit from international collaboration?
Yeah, I think that's a big point, frankly. So, for example, at Cranfield, as I mentioned, 40% of our students are international, and the attitude towards immigration. And we only have postgraduate students, by the way. So, something as simple as a change in immigration policy was a couple of years ago, when it was decided that, for example, MSc students couldn't bring members of their family along with them. Really did batter at our student numbers and sort of the attractiveness of Cranfield, but also a postgraduate study in Britain as a whole. And I think it's one of these things where we perhaps need to be a bit better at explaining to people what the benefits of having people come to Britain to conduct research, to learn, to educate themselves, either to go back to their own countries or to stay in Britain and help contribute to the research environment of science and technology, and things like the global talent visa that Christopher mentioned is one of these ways that people come to Britain and through lots of these national fellowships, the Newton Fellowship and the Hume Trust and all the rest of it, the ways that we sort of bring people into the system. There's quite a lot of effort, energy that goes into training these people, and of course, people do contribute to the British sort of science and technology atmosphere. So I think, there's probably a discrepancy in the way that funders, universities, the government explains or publicizes to people or to general public, the true value of having people come into Britain and sort of, contribute to our society, because, people are coming into Britain. I mean, me, myself, I'm not from Britain. I grew up in the Caribbean, but I've been here for 15 years now, and this is home. And, people come into Britain, contribute to the economy. And I mean, I think that we have to find a better way of highlighting this rather than the sort of, newsreel popular grandstanding opinion that all the immigrants come here and want benefits or whatever it is that's currently bandied about. So yeah, I think it's about a sort of publicity push or a sort of, better explanation of how this works and what the benefits of this are, really.
If I remember rightly, when the Campaign for Science and Engineering did its study of public opinions of science, what they discovered was that the public opinion was actually better able than the political will of the time to make a distinction between people who were travelling to support our science than others. So that they had already, as it were, internalized the sense that science was legitimately international, and you could then have different conversations about different kinds of immigration. And I think that at least one of the interesting issues for us is whether our political discourse is lagging behind political public opinion. Actually, I seem to remember some figures about, if you ask people, should students be in the immigration statistics, there were far more people who thought it was probably not a very good idea, actually, but it remains the case that they are. So something to be looked at, I think, in a specific answer to the person's question of whether actually the public opinion is in a slightly different place from where the political position is. The other thing, though, I would say is that I think it's absolutely tremendous when we see, when we're able to demonstrate, as we so frequently are, the way in which the scientific output is improved by the fact that the team that is working on it brings different cultural, disciplinary, intellectual, social, economic attitudes and opinions to bear, so that diversity of opinion within a team actually improves the outcome of the science. And it's certainly something that we see repeatedly and regularly across, obviously, arts, humanities and social science disciplines, but I think it's also true in science as well, and it's demonstrable. And that, I think, is the way that we should get at this.
So I think it's incredibly important to have those case studies and to keep bringing them forwards and to keep making the case. It's very easy to live in an echo chamber where you assume that people just, everyone gets it, right? They get that this is important, and not recognize that different elements of society see things in different ways. Because although at the moment, as you say, the UK population on the whole is quite positive about people coming to do science, technology in the UK, they're quite positive about students. We've seen other countries in the world, even countries that have quite liberal governments, where the situation has changed as people feel that housing is under pressure and so on. So, and even this morning, actually, in the Times Higher Education Supplement, the poll, a particular study was done, which shows that people have become less favourable to students. So it's still, the majority is favourable. Of course, the headline said everyone's become less favourable. No, the majority is still favourable, but it is adjusting. Unfortunately, people can make correlations where they're not necessarily there. So strains on public services, not necessarily because of the international students coming or the international researchers coming, but people can perceive that. Australia, I think, is a lesson which UK universities are looking at very closely, because Australia has a liberal government, but actually because of the turn in public opinion, they are now really restricting quite tightly the number of international students that can study there. The last Dutch government fell over. Essentially, this was one of the trigger issues for them as well, such strong feeling about the number of students that are coming in. So even though there's been a discourse in Dutch society about the value of internationalization, the value of this for innovation in the Netherlands, still the sort of perceived pressure on services and housings was strong. So I think we need to keep making the case of that and not take it for granted, actually.
I think this links also quite closely to some of the discussions that were had this morning around mobility between sectors and the career path or the known and well-known career paths of researchers, right from the undergrad level up to sort of visiting professors and things like that from around the world, and also to some of the discussions that we were having in the growth session earlier around vocalizing and making much clearer some of the impact that the research that is happening is having beyond just sort of helping the UK specific PLC. So and making that much clearer to those that are coming, so there is an incentive both to stay and to think about the UK as more than just somewhere to go to university, and then, you know, take that knowledge back home. And I know I talked earlier about sort of the benefits of internationalization, and we should all be working towards sort of global goals together. But, you know, that does sort of, you need a nice balance there, that you can't just sort of keep everybody that comes here. You know, that doesn't work either, because also we're taking away resource and knowledge from the world. The UK has one of the best academic resources in the whole world, some of the best universities. So we need to be able to take that and acknowledge that it is okay to share that back with the world as well. So there is quite a fine balance to be had, to understand, bringing people in, take it, you know, and using them and realizing the benefit of that, but also letting it back out into the world and realizing that isn't a bad thing either.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sorry, I think that's all we've got time for now. But I'd like to thank everyone for their engagement and interesting questions, both in the room and online. And of course, a huge thank you to all our speakers for insightful presentations and discussion. So now I'll hand over to Gavin to wrap up the conference.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Thanks. That really, really interesting panel. Really enjoyed that. I know I'm the only person that's now keeping you from having a drink outside, so this won't fill the whole of the 10-minute slot. It's just a couple of minutes. So just to say, if you've not come across the Foundation for Science and Technology before, we're a small charity that tries to bring together government, parliament, industry, and the research community. Check us out online or look at the QR code. We run events, we run podcasts, various things that might be of interest to this community. But in particular, we run the Foundation Future Leaders Scheme. Some of you are on the scheme, some of you have been on the scheme, some of you today are thinking of applying. But if you've not heard of it, you've got 10 days before the closing date for next year's Future Leaders Scheme, which is why I'm mentioning it now. And just to say, what do? We bring together a cohort that brings the civil and public sector together with the sort of research community in its general sense and industry. And over the course of the year, bring people to universities, to government departments, to the UK Parliament, to a whole range of different places. We go to Harwell, we go to CERN. We have quite an interesting time. And a lot of the time is spent with the group presenting to each other about their backgrounds. And it's all about trying to break down some of the silos that we all live in and try and understand across the piece the sort of science and technology ecosystem. So if you are interested in that, please have a look. And if you're thinking, how do I do that? You have now just all received an email from me that gives you the link to all the information about the Future Leaders Scheme. The email also gives you a link to a feedback survey from today's event. So please do fill that in. If you're watching online, as soon as you click leave, you'll be taken immediately to that survey. So you've got no excuse not to fill it in. But honestly, it really helps us both to keep the money flowing in, but also to improve these kind of events for the next time we do it. So please do that. I do want to finish by thanking a couple of people. We're incredibly grateful to the University of Birmingham for allowing us to use the space. It's really fantastic space, and both the people who've provided a little bit of money for that, but also the catering and all the facility staff. It's been really great. Quick plug for the Royal Commission for the Exhibition of 1851, who've given us a small grant so we can live stream this, and hopefully the people who've been watching online have really enjoyed the interaction as well. I think we all deserve a drink. If you're watching online, you're going to have to make it yourself. But if you're here, it is just outside. So thank you very much.